Hi, thanks for joining me today. I'm Molly, this is Lefty Knits, and today is podcast episode number 14. Hello, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, my name's Molly. I'm a knitter based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and on this channel I share all of my crafty endeavors, mostly of the knitting variety. Today I have a podcast episode for you. And honestly, I've been knitting a lot. I've been really proud of what I've been able to accomplish. I think a lot of it doesn't look that interesting, but I have made some moves, so that's always welcome. I've been really diving into things that I've been putting off or intimidated to start, and that always feels really good. I'm a scientist in my everyday life, so being able to scratch that problem-solving itch through knitting is always kind of a welcome challenge, although sometimes it takes me a little while to get over that hump and actually get myself to do it. For the third or fourth episode in a row, I actually don't have any acquisitions, which always feels really nice. I have a lot of beautiful yarn that I need to use. I have been reminding myself of some of the things that I have in my stash that haven't been top of mind, and it feels really good to be using all of the yarn that I have and making, I don't know about a serious dent, but trying to make a serious dent in the amount of yarn that I have. Although I did recently place an order with Knit Picks, and this weekend is a Black Squirrel Berkeley's anniversary. So I'll probably be buying some yarn, and I think my streak will be over, but that's okay. I have plans for my Knit Picks yarn that I think I'll be getting to very soon, and I don't want to deprive myself of the ability to, go shop at a store that I really like on a day of celebration for them. I'm not hardcore doing a no buy or anything. I'm just trying to be very mindful about what I bring in. So next time you'll definitely see some acquisitions. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'll start with what I'm wearing. This is my Be Thankful cardigan by Lily Kate France. I made it in a woolly knit British Aran cone. I believe the Aran cones are 400 grams, and this is the colorway oatmeal. The 400 grams is not quite enough to make this sweater. I made it in the first size, which is a little less ease than recommended, but it fits okay. The main thing that happened, I would say, is that the sleeves are a little short. I also made the body a bit shorter, and I tapered the sleeves some. This is written to have very dramatic, big sleeves, and I don't recall exactly how often I decreased. Got some fuzzies on here. I don't know exactly how much I decreased, but I did decrease a bit, and I really, I used every bit of that cone, so I don't have much yarn left. Now, this is a bottom-up sweater, and you attach the button band after, so I had to do some working out of how to make the button band work, given that I had fewer stitches picked up and less distance, but I think it worked out pretty well. And I have these beautiful coppery buttons from Black Squirrel Berkeley, actually, that I bought. I really love them. I think they look so nice on this piece, and I've seriously considered buying them to put on other cardigans and garments that I've been thinking of making, but I'm not too big on cardigans. I do have some hopes for my future that involve cardigans, but for now I've been able to hold off on using the same buttons again. I know that I made this in the beginning to middle of last year. I don't think I've ever worn it on the podcast before, but yeah, I really like it. The sleeves are a little short, but I still get a good amount of wear out of it. I think it depends on the situation, but given that this is a cropped cardigan, it's a v-neck, it's warm, but it's not too warm, and I'm finding that it's a really good layer as we are almost transitioning into our cool weather here in the Bay Area. We are still kind of in our hottest time of the season. Now that it's November, I anticipate it'll start cooling off a little, but like October, early November is kind of when our summer actually really hits. So it's been interesting to watch everybody else really settle into the cool weather. I lived in Boston for quite a while, and a lot of my friends there are dealing with weather that is, I think, below freezing. And, you know, we're still here having our summer. So it's nice. I won't complain, but I am kind of ready to feel the big fall feelings that everyone else is feeling. With that, let's go ahead and get into my finished objects. So my first finished objects are a set, Lola's little Halloween costume for this year. So for those of you who don't know, I have a cat named Lola. She's very fluffy and very cute and pretty compliant. So I made this little pumpkin hat from the book Cats and Hats by Sarah Thomas. I used Barocco Vintage for the main part of the hat and Patton's Classic Wool DK Superwash for the stem. And once I was deciding that I was going to make this hat, it was really hard for me to not create more of a costume for her. So I also made this sweater. This sweater is based on a self-drafted pattern that I made for a cat sweater that I have on my channel. And I just followed it, and I created this little chart to put duplicate stitch on the back. And I guess that's kind of centered. It's a little bit wonky. This was my first time really doing duplicate stitch, but it turned out okay. I think, you know, the message is clear. So I made a video all about making these two items, so I won't belabor the point too much. I will link it up above and down below in the description box if you're interested in checking that out. But she looked very cute. She didn't like it very much, but she only wore it for a brief period, and she's back to being her happy, naked, spoiled cat self. So all is well. My next finished object is, like many of my finished objects, like not quite finished. I struggle with the fact that I'm usually recording my podcast episodes every other week, and it does kind of take a while for things to dry in my house, so things often aren't blocked, and I typically sew in my ends after blocking. So this is my Lodestar by Kirsten Rivetta. This is a sweater from Pom Pom magazine, issue, I believe, 37. Just this week, actually, Pom Pom made an announcement that they are going to be closing shop, which is super sad. They're running a sale on, I think, their print issues from the past. I believe that their next issue is their last. So that's really sad news. I recommend that you go check out any of their magazines that you might be interested in. I know I will be doing that myself. In any case, this is the Lodestar by Kirsten Rivetta. I made it in Valley Yarns Northfield, which is a DK weight merino alpaca and silk blend. This has been on my podcast episodes a few times. Found that my stitch count was a little bit wonky. I did, I think you can see it here. So the kind of main portion of this sweater, the main calling card, I suppose, is this star pattern that you see. And I did something in mine where, because my stitch count was a little weird, I was still doing some increases after I ended the star. Let's see if I can show that. I think you can kind of see that, like, at the point, it's still kind of like there's some increases in here. So that was because I just wasn't able to get my stitch count right. I've talked about that a lot. It was a whole thing. So my star part on the front panel ends a little bit earlier than it was supposed to, like 2 or 3 repeats, I think. But I think it still looks pretty good. And other than that, my sleeves were 2 stitches smaller than they were supposed to be because of this whole, the way that my stitch counts worked out. I had 4 fewer stitches going into the sleeve separation, but I figured that would be okay. I didn't use anywhere near as much yarn as is recommended for this pattern. I had 8 balls of this yarn, I believe. Yeah, 8 balls, which would come in at just under 1,000 yards of yarn. I believe it was 992 yards. I used 7 balls almost exactly. I broke into the last one to do the bind off on the bottom, which is flipping up a little bit. I might redo it once I block the sweater. I also have the swatch that I made. So I basically, including the swatch in this, I used 7 balls plus a tiny bit to do the bind off, which came out to about 870 yards to make the third size, which I believe was supposed to use close to 1,100 to 1,200 yards of yarn. Given that my stitch count was off and my sleeves were 2 stitches smaller than they should have been, that might have been part of it. I also made them an inch shorter than the pattern calls for. The pattern indicates that the sweater should have, I think, like 13.5-inch sleeves before you start the ribbing, and I did like 12 to 12.5. I do have like pretty small proportions. I'm like a relatively small person, so my arms aren't that long, and it's supposed to be like a 3/4 sleeve. At the time I was still a little bit worried about running out of yarn, so I just decided to go a little bit shorter with the sleeves. Things like this will get closed up. That's part of it. The other thing is I believe you're supposed to taper the body a little bit. I think it's supposed to have a bit of an A-line shape to it, so every 20 to 30 rows, you're supposed to add an increase on each side, maybe 4 increases. I don't recall. I wasn't interested in increasing the size of the body at all. So I omitted the part where you're supposed to make increases. And it's not that many increases in the end. I think you're probably doing it maybe tops like 5 times or so. So I don't think that accounts for all the yarn that I didn't use in this sweater, but it's hard to say. I mean, I know that places often give very generous estimates of how much yarn you'll need, and I did make some modifications that reduce the amount of yarn, but I think even if I made the sleeves longer and done the tapering, I probably wouldn't have used over 950 yards of the yarn. And I'm pretty sure my body is about the length called for in the pattern. So I don't know. I think that's like helpful information for anybody who, like me, is often kind of playing yarn chicken or starting projects being like, well, I don't have quite enough recommended yarn, but I'm gonna like work it out. And I think a lot of times I end up having more than enough yarn, kind of like this time. And sometimes that's because I went in and I kind of knew that was going to be the case, and I make some modifications at the beginning that pay off in the end. But even this time, I think if I'd done it perfectly right, I would have had more than enough yarn to complete this exactly the way that I wanted to. So yeah, I'm really happy with this. I'm very excited to block it, to see how the lace turns out. I finished it maybe 2 days ago, but I knew that if I blocked it, it wouldn't be dry by then. So that's why you're seeing it now. I'll probably wear it like next episode. So you'll be seeing this again soon in its completed form, and I'm really, really excited to have this. So let's go ahead and talk about my whips. I have a lot of exciting whips this time. I'll start out, I have them in most of them in my Ginger Twist Studio bag from Edinburgh. It has cat hair stuck on it, just like everything in my life. This first one I've made, I think, a decent amount of progress on, but it doesn't look like that much because the stitch pattern isn't changing. It's just becoming a bigger triangle. That's fine. This is the Lost Horse Shawl by Casey Herlihy. I am making this out of Ancient Arts Fiber Little Nettle Soft, which is a blend of merino and nettle fibers. I think it's like 68% merino or so, 70% nettle. and I'm making it out of the color Orange Tiger Tabby. I would say it leans a little bit cooler than you're seeing in the picture. Like, it looks a little bit more, almost more red and less yellow, if that makes sense, but it's relatively true to color. So this is fingering weight yarn. I have one ball of it. The ball band I lost quite a while ago. I bought this at Fiber Artwork in Huntsville, Alabama, where my boyfriend is from, and great store if you're ever in the area. But I've tried to work this into a few things and ended up frogging it back both times. Now, I talked about this last week, and I've been working on a lot of patterns by Casey because she's having a knit along right now. It runs through the end of November, so you have a while left to join. She has a lot of pretty easy cowls to knit up. I highly recommend that you join, and yeah, I'll make sure to link that down below. But this pattern is one of her newer ones. I think she recently did run a knit along for this one specifically, and it's a very easy repeat to remember. I think it's over 16 rows, the stitch pattern, but basically you're just making these eyelets with center decreases every few stitches, and switching off when you're doing that based on the row that you're on. So it's pretty easy to be like, oh, I have this many eyelets, now that means I have to move the location of the eyelets. And it's honestly really easy. I haven't looked at the chart in a while. I put it down to work on and finish my Lodestar, and I honestly didn't even look at the stitch pattern when I did that, when I picked this back up after, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 days of not working on it. So it's very easy to remember, very intuitive. I'm basically just doing this until I more or less run out of yarn. It looks a little bit like wonky, and it's curling a little on the edge, but I think once I block it, it'll really open up the lace quite nicely, and I anticipate it'll look really good. So this is still in progress, which I kind of wasn't expecting, but I'm almost pleasantly surprised by, because it gave me time to finish my Lodestar. My next whip is one that I finally came back to after, I don't know, about a month. When I finished my Lodestar, I picked this one back up. I got over the fear. This is my Musselburgh by Isolde Teague that I am modding. So this is a very popular pattern. It is a stockinette hat. I have mine right here. And essentially you start at the top, you knit increases, you knit a tube, you do decreases at the bottom, and you have this little hat that is double thick. And I am making one for my boyfriend, but in twisted rib, in Blue Sky Fibers Wool Stock Light in Wild Time. So that's a 100% Peruvian wool yarn, I believe. 100% fine Highland wool, sorry. Made in Peru. Okay. And there is 218 yards or 200 meters per 50 gram hank, and I have two. One is here, and I haven't wound up the other one yet. I made my boyfriend a Musselburgh before. It is a DK weight yarn. I've talked about all of this before, and it's a little bit thick. You know, we don't have a very cold climate here in the Bay Area, so it's like a little bit thicker than he usually needs. And he also has a hat that he likes that's a commercial hat that is ribbed. And a lot of times those hats are like the rib is almost more of a twisted rib, which, you know, I showed him some pictures of ribbed hats, and he liked this one that was twisted rib a little bit more. So that's what I'm doing. I'm knitting a twisted rib hat. And he wanted it to be double thick, so I couldn't follow any pattern that I found. So I'm lightly using the Musselburgh as my template. So I don't have that much of this hat done, unfortunately. I had a lot more done last night. I'll put up a kind of bad picture of it because I restarted. So my initial intent was to have a 1-stitch twisted knit stitch like seam. So essentially there's like 4 increase points on the hat, like equidistant away from each other, and like 2 perpendicular straight lines that come out of the top of the hat. And I believe in the pattern there are 2 stitches around which you're making the increases. Now that doesn't really work when you're doing a twisted rib. So I started out by trying it as 1 stitch. And I started the increases essentially as written in the pattern, but with 1 stitch in between the increases instead of 2. And I felt like the hat was turning a little bit like pointy. And I know that pointy hats are kind of a little bit in style right now. I've heard people call them nipple hats, where you have this little like thing on the top of the hat that sticks up on your head. That's like not really my boyfriend's style, so I knew he wouldn't want that. I thought like maybe as I knit it bigger, it would kind of go away, but it didn't. Or maybe if it stretched over his head, it would go away. But I just like got kind of spooked, and in a fit of, I don't know, I feel like a lot of times, I never like totally regret it, but I just kind of like ripped it out last night before I could think too hard about it and restarted. So what I'm doing differently this time is essentially you knit like a pinhole cast on, and you have a certain number of stitches, and then the first round you knit front and back in each of those stitches. So you double the number of stitches. And to make it so that the head would be a little bit flatter, I did that twice. So I knit front and back as written in the pattern, I knit around straight, and then I knit front and back again. So I like doubled again the number of stitches at the top of the head before I started making these centered decreases, or these decreases like, or these increases centered around like the different points on the head. And I decided this time that I would do 3 stitches because I wanted it to keep a twisted rib pattern. So I have a knit, a purl, and a knit in between each of my markers, and I'm doing my increases around this, and I am making them either knitwise or purlwise in keeping with the way that the pattern is working out. And it honestly, like, it looks pretty good. It looked pretty good, except for the pointiness in its last version. It's a little bit holy. I think my twisted rib, at least, like, it's not like a very, the purl stitches aren't that tight. They're kind of like gappy, but I think when it's folded in half, it will be much better. And I'm also thinking I might make the inside portion in stockinette. Like, in theory, this is like a reversible hat, and I guess in that case it would be reversible where one side is twisted rib, one side is stockinette. I don't know if my boyfriend would wear it that way, if he would only wear the ribbed side out, but I kind of feel like that might help, I don't know, like fill in the inside of the hat, if that makes any sense. I mean, I thought about using smaller needles. These are US 1.5s, which is 2.5 millimeters. When I made the hat last time, I had 9 stitches per inch when I measured, which I think is the tightest gauge possible on the hat, which is part of the reason I don't really want to go down needle sizes. I know the ribbing might kind of change how that stretches and how that works, but I'm just going to probably go with the increases as written for the 9 stitch per inch gauge. I'll measure again once I get closer, but so far I think the hat does look a little bit less pointy on top than it did in its last version. I'll probably increase until I have about the stitches for the 9 stitch per inch for an adult medium. My boyfriend's head is right in between the adult medium and the adult large. It's a 23-inch head circumference, and the adult medium is written for 22 and the adult large is written for 24 inch. So I'll probably do the medium. I'd like this to be ready for his birthday in a couple weeks, although I think I might also be blocking it once I get to a point where I think I'd be ready to switch to either switch to the stockinette or just like make that the halfway point of my hat, because he doesn't want it to be a folded brim. He wants it to just be like a straight hat. And I think the folded brim can kind of give you some leeway in terms of length that maybe I don't have if I'm trying to make it just like fit him folded in half normally. So I think I might be blocking it in the middle, having him try it on. We'll see. But I'm glad that I kind of had this started, and that even though I frogged it and it's now tiny, that I like have started the process, that I have memorized how to do make one left and make one right purlwise increases. It shouldn't be that hard. I'm excited to get to the point where I'm just doing like rounds and rounds of the same thing, and I can kind of take it places more easily, think about it a little bit less. So I'm getting there. I think this time it'll go a lot faster than it did last time, when I was kind of still thinking a little bit more about it, and I think it will be less pointy and more to my boyfriend's taste. So hopefully you'll see a good amount of progress in this one next time we talk. My last cast on from the last 2 weeks is not exciting to look at, but very exciting for me to have started. So this is my Shifty. And that is a pattern by Drea Renee. I don't know if it's as popular anymore, but it was really having a moment a couple years ago, I would say. And all I have is the neckline, which did take me quite a while actually to do. I'm about to start the short row shaping on the back of the neck and add in my contrast colors. So I'm using Cascade Heritage Wave in Woodsy for my main color. And for my contrast colors, I'm going to be using Forest, Blues, and Stained Glass. I made a swatch a while ago where I was using Forest, Nightshade, which is a purple, and Lava, which is a red, like more of a straight red, as opposed to this, which has like some purpley blue stuff going on. I found the colors like kind of stark, especially the Lava. The red looked really not necessarily out of place, but it just like popped in a way that was different from the purple and the green. So I ordered a bunch of colors. I talked about this previously. My plan was to kind of do a little swatch and see how I felt about the colors. And I kind of surprised myself. So this is the little swatch. So because I'd already made a swatch for Gauge, I decided that this would just be really tiny. And from the bottom, I used Wildflower, I believe, Blues, Forest, Nightshade, and Stained Glass. And the Blues looks a little bit brighter, I think, than I want. But my plan is to use these 3 colors. And I like the idea of the red, but I feel like this red is a little bit more cool toned, I suppose. This yarn will kind of go from like a dark-ish blue to a purple. I might start from the outside. I might kind of see how I feel about that, because the outside does have this like, it kind of looks like there's maybe one strand of red, one of like a dark navy blue or purple, and a lighter purple if the other one's purple. So like a purple or red and like a dark bluey black purple. So that might be the move. I do plan to start from the outside of the blue, because I think the inside is where the colors are a little bit lighter, and the Forest, I mean, is pretty, I'll probably start from the middle. I think this one is like kind of it doesn't have quite as striking of a change as far as I'm concerned. I think I'll still be doing a little bit of trial and error in terms of where in a skein I'm pulling from for my contrast colors, but I like the idea of these three. I think that they will kind of look pretty good together. Like, that's the hard thing about making a swatch, is you'll never kind of encompass like every option in terms of all the colors, but I think that I like these three the best, and I think that they're the most cohesive. Like, you know, I thought about using my purple still, but I kind of thought that this was close enough to the purple. So these are the three I plan on going with. This sweater is supposed to be a sport weight. It's written for spin cycle dyed in the wool, as many of Andrea Mowry's patterns are. And I mean, it is a sport weight yarn, but, and I've never touched it. I guess that's the caveat, is like I've never gotten my hands on dyed in the wool or any spin cycle yarn. This looks like it's 3-ply versus, I believe, dyed in the wool is 2-ply. So there's definitely like differences in the fiber. This is also like a sock yarn. It's a 75% merino, 25% nylon yarn that I don't think I've mentioned that. So there's those kind of differences in the fiber. That being said, I tend to think of something that's like 200 yards per 50 grams to be more of a fingering weight. This yarn is definitely a fingering weight. I believe there's close to 440 yards per 100 grams in this. And the gauge of the Shifty is given as 26 stitches per 4 inches. So those kind of feel like fingering weight numbers to me. And I'm not the first person to make this in Cascade Heritage Wave. That's definitely like a pretty common yarn for this pattern. My gauge, I think, was about 30 stitches per inch in my swatch. I think that it will be a little bit bigger when I'm knitting the whole project. I feel like my gauge is looser when I have a very large circumference that I'm knitting. So I think that will change it a little bit. I'm making the third size, which I believe is a 38-inch bust as written. I have about a 36, 37-inch bust. So I'm hoping for no to negative ease within the like 0 to maybe negative 2 to 4-inch ease range. And I think that this will probably fall in there. I'll be definitely keeping track of especially my row gauge as I knit. I believe my row gauge is also off. I'll be like, you know, making a little bit of a modification as I go, as needed to the pattern, given that I am knitting at a slightly tighter gauge that I do think works pretty well for the yarn that I have. This is all over mosaic knitting. It's all over color work. Mosaic knitting is a little bit different because you're only using one yarn at a time, which can kind of speed the process up a little. I do kind of think that this will be a labor of love. I mean, an all over color work fingering weight / sport weight, I guess. Sweater is not really something that I've done before. I've done yokes before in fingering, but never a whole sweater. So it'll definitely be taking a while, but I'm excited to kind of dive in and start seeing how it's going to knit up. I think that might be very mesmerizing to me and kind of lead me to feel some excitement and pressure to work faster. Not externally, but just because I'm curious what it'll look like. I did do a tubular cast on for this pattern. I think it looks super beautiful and neat. It's like the stitches just kind of grow out of nowhere. Now, it was a struggle. So Andrea Mowry's suggestion is to use a long tail tubular cast on, and she has a video about it. I found it pretty easy to get my fingers to move the right way, but when it came to working the rows, I felt like my stitches were twisting all over the place. I was very confused about how to make it work. So I decided that I would use the crochet hook provisional cast on method with scrap yarn. and that worked very well for me. I'll link the tutorial below that I used for that. And I tend to knit, like, I don't know, I mean, I guess maybe I should be using tubular cast-ons more, because I do knit a lot of top-down sweaters. I guess a lot of them have necklines added later, often folded over necklines added later, so I'm using more like tubular bind-offs or things like that in lieu of a tubular cast-on, but it's a very satisfying thing. And when you do the scrap yarn provisional cast-on method, you have this like crochet chain as your first row that at the end you kind of unzip, and it's so satisfying to like pull that off and pull it out, and like in its place you just have this like perfectly folded over collar look. This, like, I'm trying to prioritize my hat for my boyfriend so that it's done for his birthday. As I talked about last podcast episode, have some plans for another Casey Knits project for the knit along. So this is like kind of on the back burner. I am a little bit intimidated. You know, I've kind of done like the easy part now, and I have to start the stranded color work short rows and then the mosaic knitting where I'm going to be switching colors all the time. I'm going to have to make some color-based decisions. So I'm kind of like just at the point where it's time to really like get down to business on this sweater, and I'm excited but afraid, and I'll probably procrastinate on it a little bit going forward. I don't know. It's like not my highest priority, but I am knitting a lot, so I think that it will be growing as I'm sort of in a place where I feel like I can really hunker down on some like difficult knitting, because this is probably the project in the most difficult place where I kind of have to make some serious decisions and pay attention and kind of figure out how it's gonna look. But I'm really excited. If you've made a Shifty before, I'd love to see pictures, talk about it. It feels like it's a project that I've had on my mind since the moment I saw it in like 2019 at some point. I want to say maybe like summer of 2019 is when I first spotted it. No, it was like pre-COVID when I was getting back into knitting, and I just saw the sweater and I was like really taken aback by how beautiful it was, and just really like, it feels wild to be at the point where I'm like comfortable making it. And I know like that I'll finish it. I think that was the thing, is like doing such a big project and investing that much time in something knitted was still kind of foreign to me. And to now be like, you know, yeah, okay, a fingering weight, like all over colorwork sweater is going to take me a while, but I know I'll finish it. And that's kind of fun. It's cool to be, you know, really into knitting as something that is like a part of my daily life in the way that it is. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed hanging out and hearing what I've been working on recently. As always, I'd love to chat about what is on your needles. I'm always down to talk knitting. I think that the more people I have in my life to talk about knitting with, besides my boyfriend, who I'm around basically 24 hours a day, the better for him and his sanity. So hit me up, chat with me. Now that it's November and a lot of places are getting really cold, I'm sure that some of you are starting to gear up for your winter knitting, and if you have projects in mind for that, I'd love to hear it as well, because I am starting to plan my winter ideas as I'm sort of closing in on finishing a lot of the projects I had in mind for the fall. I think next week I will be starting to talk about gift knitting a little, because it is getting to be that time. So make sure to tune in next week if that's something you're interested in. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I release videos about knitting every Friday. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.